Wyoming Territory, October 1883. The first snow had not yet fallen, but the air had teeth. Alban Dorsey stepped out of his cabin before dawn, tugging on his coat and lighting a lantern. The mountains crouched in the distance, black against the ash-blue sky. He had been alone on his land for 3 years now, running cattle and fixing fences, trying not to remember the war or the way his brother bled out in his arms beneath a Tennessee pine. The solitude suited him until he heard a sound from the shed. It was faint. A scrape, maybe. A cough muffled by wood. He froze. A mountain lion would not cough. He set the lantern down and drew his rifle. The wind kicked up, rattling the dry grass. Alban crossed the short distance from cabin to shed in 6 long strides. He pushed the door open, rifle raised. 3 figures huddled in the shadows. A woman, seated on the dirt floor, turned her head sharply toward the light. Her eyes did not follow him, but her body tensed like she could feel him there. 2 girls, one maybe 10, the other no older than 6, pressed against her sides, barefoot and wrapped in a threadbare quilt. "Please," the woman said, her voice low, steady. "We will leave if you want. Just let the girls rest first. They are so tired." Alban lowered the rifle. He did not speak for a moment, just looked at them. The woman's hair was dark and tangled, her cheeks hollow, her hands clenched around the quilt like she was holding on to the world itself. "You are blind," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she answered. He looked at the girls. The older one was watching him without blinking, her chin high like she had made herself their protector. The younger one leaned into her mother's lap, curled up like a kitten. "I ain't throwing out children into the cold," he said finally, "but I want answers, after sunup." The woman nodded once. "Thank you." He turned and walked back to the cabin, heart pounding. He could not explain why it rattled him so much, the woman's calm voice, the way she had not begged. She had only asked for a little warmth. The next morning he brought them food. The girls sat on the shed floor eating biscuits and eggs like they had not had a meal in days. The woman ate slower, careful. Her hands moved over her lap as she listened to the sounds around her. "I am Jessa Garland," she said. "These are my daughters, Tilly and Thea." "Tilly's the big one," the girl said quickly, mouth half full. "I am 10. Alban nodded. "Alban Dorsey, this is my land. You are lucky I found you before a cougar did. We were not trying to steal, we were hiding." Jessa's voice was quiet but steady. "My husband died 2 years ago. We were living near Laramie. A man came through town last week, said he could take us to work laundry, cleaning, said there was a place in Rawlins. He lied." Alban leaned against the shed door. "He tried to take us," she said. I think he meant to sell us. I fought. Tilly bit him hard enough to bleed. We ran. Got off the trail. I do not know where we are. You are 50 miles from Rawlins and 30 from Laramie. Closest law is in Medicine Bow." Jessa's chin lifted. "Then we will keep walking." He looked at the girls again. Thea was dozing off, cheek against her mother's leg. Tilly stared at him with a kind of suspicion that made him feel like he was the one being judged. "You cannot walk anywhere, not with children, not blind, not out here. We have done it before." Alban rubbed his hand down his face. "You can stay," he said. "For now, I have enough food for the winter, but you help where you can." Jessa bowed her head. "We will not be a burden." That night they moved into the cabin. Alban gave them his bed and took the floor by the fire. Thea curled up under the quilt with her mother, and Tilly lay on the rug beside them, one hand on her mother's arm like she was afraid of losing her again. He watched Jessa as the firelight flickered over her face. Her eyes were pale gray, clouded. She was younger than he first thought, maybe not much older than 30, but life had carved lines around her mouth. "Why did you not go to family?" he asked. "All gone," she said. "My parents died of fever. My husband's people never wanted us. And we do not know anyone else." He nodded, then looked into the fire. The next days passed in a kind of rhythm. Alban worked the land, chopped wood, checked traps. Jessa kept the cabin clean, helped him sort dry goods by touch. Tilly watched everything he did, asked questions about cows and fences and rifles. Thea followed the old barn cat like it was her job. One morning, Jessa was standing at the stove, listening for the sound of boiling water. Alban watched her hands move careful over the counter, finding the kettle by memory. "You do not act helpless," he said. She smiled faintly. "Because I am not." He liked that about her. She never complained, never asked for more than what was offered. She carried herself like someone who had learned long ago that the world owed her nothing and that she would make a life anyway. One evening, after supper, he found her on the porch, face tilted to the wind. "You smell the snow?" she asked. He stepped beside her. "It is coming." Thea was asleep inside. Tilly was drawing pictures with a stick in the dirt. The sun had gone down behind the hills. "Do you miss him?" Alban asked, surprising himself. "My husband?" she asked. "Yes, but not the way people think. He was kind. He worked hard. But we were never close. We married because it was expected. I do not think I have ever." She stopped. Alban looked at her. "Ever what?" "Felt safe," she said. "Not really." He looked out into the dark. "You are safe here," she nodded. That night the snow began to fall. And for the first time in years, Alban let someone else tend the fire. The snow thickened by morning, laying down a quiet white hush that blanketed the hills and softened the world. Alban woke stiff and cold on the cabin floor, but the fire still burned low, and the smell of flour and lard told him someone had already stirred. Jessa stood near the hearth, sleeves rolled to her elbows, flattening dough with the heel of her palm. She moved with a slow confidence, her fingers following the grain of the table, measuring by feel. Tilly sat nearby, threading a length of twine through a buttonhole on her coat. Thea's soft breathing came from the bed. Alban reached down to pull on his boots. "You sleep light," Jessa said without turning. "I have to," he answered. "Predators don't knock before they come." He crossed toward the stove, pouring water into the kettle before setting it over the flame. Her hands paused for a moment, then resumed their work. "Tilly said you used to break horses," she said. "I did, down near Cheyenne. That was before I bought this land. She asked if you could teach her." Alban turned his head. "She doesn't scare easy. Neither did her father, but she's not reckless. She just wants to know what she's capable of." He leaned back against the counter. "That's a rare thing to want for someone her age. She's been watching you, learning how you move, how you speak. I think she trusts you." He looked over at the girl, who had gone quiet, eyes fixed on the needle she was threading. She didn't look up. After breakfast, Alban led the girls outside while Jessa rested. The barn held a single mare, old and mild-eyed, with a coat like worn buckskin. Tilly ran her palm along the animal's neck with the reverence of someone touching something sacred. "She's called Myrtle," Alban said. "She won't run, won't spook. Good place to start." Tilly looked up. "Can I try?" He nodded. "But first, watch how I do it." He showed her how to hold the reins gentle but firm, how to press her heel just enough to make the mare step forward. Then he dismounted and helped her up. She sat straight as a rail, jaw tight with focus. Thea clapped from the fence rail. "She's doing it," the little girl called. Alban kept a hand near the reins in case the mare startled, but she didn't. Tilly rode a slow circle, her face unreadable until she stopped and grinned, cheeks flushed. "She listens to me," she said. "She's old," Alban said. "She listens to everyone." Tilly laughed, a sound that surprised all of them. They stayed out until the wind sharpened again. Inside, the fire had been stoked, and Jessa was sitting near it, knitting by feel. Alban watched the movement of her fingers, the way she counted rows beneath her breath. "You're good with your hands," he said. "There's not much else I have left to rely on." He sat across from her, the fire between them. "I never asked what you did before," he said. "My husband worked the rail lines. I took in mending. Some women start talking when you sew for them. I learned a lot about people that way." "You ever think of settling again?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Her hands paused, then resumed. "Only if it means something different than it did before." He watched the fire crackle. Later that week, he found her in the root cellar, sorting potatoes by touch. She was humming under her breath, a tune he didn't recognize. "You don't complain much," he said. "I never saw the use in it." He leaned against the post, arms folded. "You're not easy to read, Jessa," she smiled faintly. "I've had to learn how to keep my voice steady when everything else breaks." He didn't say anything for a while. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You ever want to go back east?" "No." "Why not?" "There's nothing for me there." "And too much memory." He nodded slowly. That night, after the girls had gone to sleep, she sat by the fire with her knitting, and he joined her without a word. The silence stretched between them, not heavy but full. After a while, she turned her head slightly. "I used to be afraid of the dark," she said. "Before I lost my sight. Now it doesn't matter whether the sun's up or not. The world's the same." Alban swallowed. "I've seen men let the dark eat them alive." She turned her face toward him. "And you," he looked down at his hands. "I'm still crawling out." She reached across the space between them, her fingers brushing his wrist just once. A careful, deliberate touch. "You're not alone anymore," she said. And in that quiet moment, with the snow still falling outside and the firelight dancing across the walls, he believed her. The storm passed after 3 days. When the clouds finally broke, the light outside came sharp and clean, casting long blue shadows across the snow. Alban stepped off the porch, boots crunching through the crust, and looked out over the white stretch of land. A coyote had passed near the fence line overnight, its narrow tracks stitched through the drifts. Inside, Thea sat on a stool by the hearth, stringing dried berries onto a thread. Jessa had taught her how to knot the ends with her teeth. Tilly had taken to shadowing Alban again, trailing behind him with a steady gaze, and 1,000 questions she kept to herself now. Jessa was mending the canvas flap that hung over the woodshed. She sat with her spine straight, knees tucked beneath her dress, hands working the heavy needle through thick cloth. Alban watched her from the doorway a moment before speaking. "You ever done any trapping?" "Not since I was a girl," she said. "My uncle used to run lines in the Dakota Territory. He let me come once. I remember the smell of the pelts more than anything." "There's a snare line a mile out. I'm checking it today." She nodded. "You want me to send Tilly?" "I was thinking you might come." Jessa shifted slightly, threading the needle again. "I'm not fast. I'm not going for speed." He saddled the mare with slow, deliberate movements. Jessa stood beside him, one hand on the saddle horn, the other on his sleeve for balance. He lifted her gently, careful not to jostle her knee. The trail wound through a shallow draw where the wind still whispered low through the bare cottonwoods. Snow clung to the branches like lace. Jessa sat straight in the saddle, one hand loose on the reins, the other resting against her thigh. "You always ride without holding on?" he asked. "Only when I trust the horse," she said. They found the first snare near a stand of scrub. A rabbit, already stiff with cold, hung limp in the loop. Alban untied it, checked the wire, reset it. Jessa listened to the rustle of his coat, the snap of the branch as he bent to clear the snow. "You move like someone who's had to hide before," she said. "I grew up near border country. You learn to keep your steps quiet." "Where was that?" "Southern Missouri. My folks had a small spread, burned in the war." She didn't ask which side. He was grateful. They walked the rest of the line in silence. The sun rose higher, catching in the snow crust. Alban glanced at her once, noticed how she tilted her head slightly, as if catching the shape of the land through sound alone. On the way back, she spoke again. "You're not like most men I've known." "How's that?" "You leave space for silence." "Sometimes there's more truth in it," she nodded. "I think so too." That night, after supper, Jessa sat at the table with a small tin of pins and a length of muslin. She was cutting a pattern by feel, fingers tracing the edge of a plate she'd used as a guide. Alban sat across from her, sharpening his skinning knife. "You ever think about teaching again?" he asked. "I taught Tilly her letters, and Thea's starting to recognize shapes." "But you mean something more. You'd be good at it." "I don't think I'd be welcome in a town schoolhouse." He met her eyes. "Not every place judges the same." She gave a small nod and folded the muslin. Later, when the girls were asleep, he stepped outside. The moon hung low and full above the ridge, casting silver light across the field. Jessa stood near the porch rail, one hand on the post. "I was listening to the wind," she said. He joined her, arms folded against the cold. "What's it telling you?" "That it's going to get colder before it gets warmer." He looked at her, the lines of her face softened by moonlight. "I wouldn't have made it through last winter if you hadn't come," he said quietly. She turned her face toward him. "You were surviving. Barely." She reached out, placed her hand against his chest, just over his heart. Her touch was light but certain. "You're not just surviving anymore," she said, and in the silence that followed, he realized she was right. By late November, the snow had hardened to a crust that cracked beneath boots, and the sun rose slow and low, barely clearing the ridge before sinking again. The wind cut sharper, and the creek froze in ribbons along its edges. Alban strung a second layer of hides over the bunkhouse windows and sealed the gaps in the barn with scrap wood. Jessa stitched new mittens from rabbit fur for the girls, shaping the thumbs carefully by touch. One morning, Thea woke with a cough that rattled deep in her chest. Her cheeks flushed hot, and her breath came shallow. Jessa kept to her side, wiping her brow with cool cloths, ladling broth between fitful dreams. Tilly helped in quiet bursts, fetching water, steeping dried mint leaves, grinding horehound, but the girls' shoulders were tight with worry. Alban rode out at first light, following the long trail eastward toward the homestead, where an elderly widow named Miriam kept a store of winter herbs and a fair knowledge of old cures. He returned before dusk, wind burned and silent, with a pouch of dried mullein and a bottle of honey wrapped in oilcloth. That night, Jessa sat with Thea bundled against her, rocking gently, humming a tune Alban had never heard before. It was low and slow and carried something between prayer and memory. "She's holding steady," Jessa said, voice hoarse, but it could turn fast. Alban crouched by the fire, rubbing his hands together. "You need sleep." "I close my eyes and hear her breathing. That's enough." He didn't argue. Instead, he stood and banked the fire, then pulled a blanket from the peg and laid it gently over her shoulders. Days passed. Thea's fever broke quietly one morning as frost limbed the window panes. She woke asking for the barn cat, and Jessa wept soundlessly into the crook of her arm, her body trembling with the weight of it. When the child slept again, Jessa stepped outside wrapped in a shawl. Alban followed, boots crunching behind her. She didn't speak until she'd found the rail and leaned her weight into it. "I thought I was going to lose her." "You didn't." She nodded, her face turned toward the scent of pine smoke from the chimney. He watched the wind lift strands of her hair and carry them across her cheek. "You haven't asked for anything since the day you arrived." "I never wanted to be a burden." "You aren't." Her fingers tightened slightly on the railing. "It's hard being helped." "I've spent years proving I could manage without it." "You don't have to prove anything here." She turned her head, listening to the quiet. "You say that like it's easy." "No," he said. "I say it like I mean it." Inside, Tilly had taken to reading aloud in the evenings, her voice halting but sure. Alban had brought down a slim book of sermons from the shelf, not for the words themselves, but for the cadence, the rhythm of language. Thea listened with her thumb pressed to her chin, and Jessa sat with her knitting, counting stitches under her breath. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Jessa remained seated near the fire, her hands still for the first time in days. Alban sat across from her, a mug of coffee cooling between his palms. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She tilted her head. "For us, for you," he said. "But I won't pretend I'm not thinking about the other." She folded her hands in her lap. "I think about spring, about planting onions and beans, about the girls running in the grass again." "That's not far off." "No," she said, "but it feels like another country." He leaned forward slightly. "I know the land. I've got space. You've got strength. Seems to me we'd both be fools not to build something with that." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his hand, her fingers light but steady. "You're not a man who says things he doesn't mean." "No." "Then yes," she said. "I'd like to try." He closed his hand over hers, and they sat like that, the fire crackling low, the wind brushing softly against the eaves, and for the first time in years, Alban felt the shape of something whole taking root in the quiet between them. By mid-December, the snow ceased falling long enough for the world to reclaim its shape. The ridges stood sharp against the sky again, and the narrow trail to the creek showed under the thinning crust. Alban had taken to rising earlier, clearing paths with a wide-bladed shovel he'd built from an old wagon board and iron scraps. He left Jessa's tread untouched unless she asked. He'd learned she preferred to find her own footing, even now, when the snow reached the tops of her boots. Tilly had begun carving small figures from driftwood Alban brought in by the armload. She sat on the porch most afternoons, knife in hand, shaping slender horses and deer with a quiet intensity. Thea, less restless now, spent more time in the barn brushing Myrtle's coat with a piece of old canvas and humming to herself. One evening after supper, Jessa set her hand on the edge of the table, fingers spread slightly. Alban understood the gesture by now. It meant she had something to say. "I've been thinking about the spring," she said, her voice low so it wouldn't carry to the girls. He set aside the tin box he'd been sorting nails into. "Go on." "I'd like to plant flax, if we can clear enough ground. It grows well in poor soil, and the stalks can be spun into linen once they're redded. You know how to work flax," I learned before I lost my sight. "My mother kept a small patch behind the kitchen. I remember the smell of the breaking. Like damp straw and earth. I can break ground near the creek. It'll hold the moisture better," she nodded. "I'd need help with the spinning, but if we can manage that, I can sew shirts, trade them, maybe even teach the girls." Alban leaned back in his chair, the legs creaking. "You want to build a trade?" "I want to build something that doesn't vanish when snow falls." He smiled, slow and steady. "You already have." She reached across the space between them, not hesitating this time. Her fingers slid around his, warm and sure. "We're not just surviving anymore, Alban. I want to live here, with you." Outside, the wind shifted, stirring the pine boughs. Alban turned her hand over in his, studying the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip. "You've already got the best room in the house," he said. "The rest is just details." She laughed softly, tilting her head toward him. "Then let's sort the details." The following days filled with small preparations. Alban rode into Medicine Bow with a list handwritten by Tilly, flax seed, carding combs, and lamp oil. He returned with a sack of seed and a bolt of wool cloth he'd bartered from a ranch widow with a fondness for apple preserves. Jessa held the material in her lap for a long while, fingers moving over the weave. "Feels warm," she said. "Like it'll last." "It should," he replied. "I paid in pies." In the barn, Tilly helped clear a stall for a second mare Alban had arranged to purchase come thaw. She was speaking more now, about the things she hoped to learn: harness fitting, tack repair, even how to read a trail for signs of sickness. Alban answered each question with quiet patience, and when her hands grew cold, he showed her how to warm them beneath her arms, not by the fire. One night, long after the girls had gone to sleep, Jessa and Alban sat near the hearth. The fire had burned low, casting more shadow than light. He leaned back against the wall, legs stretched out, and she sat cross-legged on the rug, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "You ever think," she asked, "what it would have been like if we'd met in another place?" He considered that, eyes on the embers. "Maybe I wouldn't have seen you as clearly." She turned her face toward him. "You see me now, I do." She reached for him, her touch unhurried. He leaned down and their foreheads met. No words passed between them, just breath and warmth and the quiet certainty of something longed for and found. That winter passed without illness after Thea's fever. The days lengthened, and the snow began to recede from the base of the pines. The creek swelled with runoff. One morning, Jessa stood on the porch and tilted her face toward the breeze. "It smells like thaw," she said. He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We'll start the flax beds tomorrow." She leaned into him, her hand resting over his. "I never imagined I'd find this." "You made it," he whispered. "You made space for it." She turned her head slightly so her cheek brushed his jaw. "I want to marry you." He didn't answer right away. He just held her tighter, anchoring her to the life they'd built. "Then we will," he said. "Here in the spring, with the girls and the creek and the light coming back." She nodded once, and they stood like that, the air warming around them. They were married under the cottonwoods behind the barn. Alban carved a simple ring from a piece of elk bone he'd saved from the first winter. Jessa wore a dress she'd pieced together from scraps of blue calico, and the wool Alban had brought home. Tilly braided Thea's hair with pine needles and bits of dried cornflower. Miriam came from Medicine Bow to witness, bringing a small bouquet of sage and a tin of molasses cookies. Alban spoke his vows without flourish, just a steady voice and a promise that had already taken root in the days they'd lived side by side. Jessa answered with a single phrase, "You are my home." That spring, the flax bloomed pale blue behind the cabin. Tilly helped with the harvest, and Thea took to sleeping on the porch with her arms around Myrtle's neck. The girls grew strong, and so did the land. Alban built a second room onto the cabin, a loom space for Jessa. He carved her name into the lintel above the door, each letter deep and smooth. She ran her fingers over it one morning and smiled. "Feels like it belongs." "So do you," he said. And she did. They all did. They lived on that land for the rest of their days. The girls married in time, raising children of their own who learned to ride before they could spell. Jessa's hands never slowed, even as her hair turned silver. Alban built her a bench near the creek where she could sit and listen to the water moving over stone. Every year, when the flax bloomed, Alban would press a few petals into her palm, and she'd close her hand around them, smiling. They grew old with the land, with the wind and the seasons, with the quiet kind of love that doesn't ask, only gives. And they were happy. Fully, deeply, without need for more.